All right, let's do it. Welcome to the David Hill Report Show. Obviously, my name is David Hill. I'm a aspiring sports journalist out of Houston, Texas. Currently going to Texas Southern University, majoring in broadcast journalism, and just wanted to create some more content on the YouTube side, especially regarding some of the articles and things I'm writing. I write for Clutch Fans, which is a fan website covering the Houston Rockets, and I also write for HBCU Legends on Sports Illustrated covering Texas Southern athletics. For those of you who've known me and have followed this channel for the last couple of years, have known that there have been quite a few transitions in what I've been doing. So this is just something new and looking forward to continuing that. I want to give a quick shout out to the Brado and Will show. I was on there a couple of weeks ago and it was the first kind of podcast, YouTube streaming setup that I had experienced in a while, and so that kind of got my interest back up for doing something here. So just want to give a shout out to them. It was great being on their show, and hopefully y'all see me on there sometime soon in the future. But what I'm looking to do is we're going to look at some of the articles that I've written over the last month since the season has ended and kind of talk about, just those articles and what they consist of. We got a couple I want to go over today. So let's get straight into it, starting with Tari Eason. So many of you know Tari Eason is a pending restricted free agent this summer. And as we, let me scroll it a little bit as we get down. So one of the biggest stories or kind of background stories about this is that last off season, before the season started in October, Tari actually was reported by Brian Woodhorse. We can find it right here. So last offseason, the Rockets initiated extension talks with Eason in hopes of reaching an agreement on a long-term deal. But that hope apparently dwindled after ESPN's Brian Woodhorse reported that Eason declined a deal in excess of $100 million. So as it's written right there, Tari Eason and Rockets began negotiating contract extensions off of his rookie contract, and Eason basically told him 100 mil is not going to do it. Right? Basically told him to decline the offer and decided to gamble this season and play on an expiring contract. Now it's not really expiring because he's a restricted free agent, so it's not like he just hits the market immediately. But however, it does leave room for other teams to come in and try to sign him off a deal. A couple things when it comes to this. Tari is a guy who is definitely going to have interest this offseason, right? You think about his skill set and what he provides. He's a guy who can, when he's on his game, can shoot the ball real well, is obviously a good to great defender. Still has a couple things he needs to work on as far as, ball handling and playmaking. But those three things, if you can shoot the ball and you can defend at his height, around 6'6", 6'7", athletic, drives to the basket well, you're going to find a place in this league. Now, as far as this year, like we said earlier, as I go back to my regular screen, Tari took a gamble on himself. Anytime you're playing on an expiring deal, you're playing on a contract that's is going to be up in this summer. The big goal from that is to perform well. Is to almost have a career year. And for the situation with Tari, it kind of didn't go as planned, right? Still had trouble, staying on the floor for a lot of the games this season. Well, not that much like he's had usually, but one of the main things that really took a dip in Tari's game this year was shooting, and particularly the stretch in March. He had a terrible March. I mean, it was one of the worst shooting stretches that I can remember ever watching. So here it is right here. While his defense continued to excel, his shooting was inconsistent, as evidenced by making only 21.8% of his three-pointers after the All-Star break. Inside the arc, his 41.6% clip was a career low. I think before the All Star break, he was up to like 49% from three, right? Which we kind of knew that was, not really who Tari was, but he just had a great stretch of playing. And then obviously, post All Star break, he hit Haywall, specifically in the March year, the March month, where it was a stretch where he missed like 21 straight threes, right? I mean, it was pretty bad. I think for the month, his splits, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was below 10%. And I think the one thing that hurt the most also, too, is that, you know, when the shot wasn't falling, he really became unplayable in some instances because he couldn't do anything else to keep himself on the floor consistently. And you get that with young players, right? young players, they miss a lot of shots. It gets in their head, and it kind of affects, what they do outside of that. And it's just something that Tari has to learn. Defense is always going to be there, but just the other parts of the game was dipped once the shot wasn't falling. The playoffs came, he still struggled a bit, but defensively he really shined. And it's something that was brought up by Ime Udoka, during the postseason. His defense on LeBron for the last, 2 to 3 games of that playoff series was actually really good. I have a quote here from Udoka after Game 4. Some of his natural instincts and things he does, you can't teach. You want guys to be solid and follow the game plan and all that. But some guys do what they want. You're going to get burned every now and then, but more often than not, he'll make the right play and get a deflection or a steal. Tari being Tari, you've got to let him do what he does, right? So basically the idea that, sometimes you have these players who sometimes they're going to stick to the game plan and stay disciplined, and sometimes they might, go around the edges, but Tari more often than not is gonna, make some kind of impact on the play instead of just, missing an assignment and then getting burned, right? Coaches love players like that. They don't, in basketball they always tell players don't be robots. Like don't just do the same thing every single time. Like be a player, be a basketball player. People hear that a lot. Like we said, once you don't once you don't sign an extension and pretty much bet on yourself, like you got to pretty much come out and have a great year. And Tari didn't. So now you turn down $100 million. Again, we don't know how many years, we don't know how much of it was guaranteed, but you turn down $100 million. You better come back and show them why you're worth more than $100 million, right? And Tari necessarily didn't do that. And it'll be interesting to see if that deal is still on the table for whatever negotiations come up forward. But at the end of the day, for Tari, if you're looking at the year and looking how you want it to happen, it didn't really go as planned. But however, Tari is a restricted free agent. And so what that means is that teams, will have the opportunity to offer Tari, offer sheets to see if they can lure him away from the Rockets. A couple teams have been reported to possibly have an interest, one of them being the Phoenix Suns and Los Angeles Lakers. But one of the teams who I think is an actual realistic party as far as getting and recruiting Tari is the Chicago Bulls. Chicago has $55 million up in cap to spend this summer. And now with these new, CBA rules, like you can't just have a bunch of cash space and just sit on it until the following year. Like you have to spend a majority of that. And so I think Tari is, a player that they definitely would want to have interest in. They are rebuilding. Fired Billy Donovan over a couple months ago. Our team that's rebuilding, but traded Vucevic. Their roster is relatively young. A guy like Tari fits in pretty much well with their team, and he's out of the other two teams that do have interest in him. He's a definite starter, I would say, on that team, which a role that he doesn't have with the Rockets when healthy. He's not a starter when the Rockets are a fully healthy team. So, and I think that also is one of the things that kind of factored into him declining that contract, is feeling like he deserved more and wanted to show why he is a potential starter. In the restricted free agency, teams do have the tendency to overpay. In free agency, you're gonna have to overpay a little bit, right? Because obviously you have multiple bidders, especially if you have a player who's highly valued. But however, particularly in restricted free agency, because you pretty much have to give an offer that the Rockets or the primary team isn't gonna want to match, right? So you have to kind of overpay in that sense. So now that we have this information out that Tari pretty much declined, again, we don't know the number, how much was guaranteed over how many years, but declined $100 million. Who's to say the Bulls are gonna say like, hey, Tari's coming off a down year. Rockets are probably not even gonna want to offer that anymore. If we go up from that, that might be the steal, right? Rafael Stone during the exit interviews didn't necessarily talk about how the contract negotiations were going specifically, but he did say that, he expects Tari to be back, and he still values him and a man who's also going to be eligible for an extension this offseason very highly, and definitely a priority to sign both of them back. But however, again, Tari is restricted. So if a team comes up with an offer, the Rockets do have up to 48, believe it's 48 or it's to 60 hours to come back to see if they want to match that or not. Now, the thing with the teams who do offer Tari a contract. One of the tricky situations is if you send an offer sheet, you can't use that money to try to offer somebody else a contract in free agency. Like that money goes on hold and you have to pretty much play with the rest of the money you have left, and you can't touch that until the Rockets make their decision. So it does kind of hinder, the external teams a little bit, and that plays into the Rockets' favor. However, again, if you're the Bulls and or whoever offers him an offer sheet, and you're confident that you can send an offer that the Rockets can't match, then you're cool with it. The flip side of that also is too, you send, and it's also why, if Tari was unrestricted, he probably would be looking around like mid-level exception deals, 15 to 17 million, I would say. But he's gonna have a chance to, take home a contract that he's probably gonna be making a lot more in, because again, what I said, teams are gonna be willing to overpay because of his restricted status, and also as well, the whoever external team offers him a deal is not going to offer him a mid-level exception contract, because the Rockets will just match that, right? Easy, nothing to think about. You just match it. I remember a couple years, I believe it was 2023. Austin Reeves was a restricted free agent as well, and he didn't have anybody give him an offer sheet. And a lot of people thought he was gonna, have a lot of suitors, a lot of people willing to pay him. He didn't have anything, and so the Lakers were able to scoop in and be like, "Hey, nobody's here offering you contract. Take this team friendly deal because nobody else is willing to really pursue you." Now that ended up working out great for the Lakers, because now Reeves was arguably on one of the best deals in the league, and he's coming off an all-star caliber year, and he's been a great player for them. He's going to be looking to get the bag, right? I think it was reported yesterday, it was I can't remember the exact number. I think it was like 258 million, contract overall, right? So now he's looking to really cash in because he took the discount because nobody wanted to pursue him while he was a restricted free agent. So we've seen scenarios like that happen, and whoever is looking to go at Tari, and again, I think Tari will actually have teams looking to sign him. Like, I don't think it'll be a situation with Reeves. I think he will actually see an offer sheet from another team. One thing also to bring into consideration as far as Tari maybe staying with the Rockets is that we haven't had a unrestricted, excuse me, we haven't had a restricted free agent leave a team outright by signing an offer sheet in a while. We haven't had a restricted free agent leave by signing a new offer sheet from a new franchise in about 6 years. And the ones that did switch teams after that were via sign and trade, right? I think Grant Williams was a sign and trade with the Dallas Mavericks a couple years ago in one of those. I can't remember the other two off the top of my head, but we haven't had that in a while. And so that does give a lot of probability to Tari coming back to Houston, just because, it's been a while. And kind of what I was saying earlier, as far as teams having to overpay, I think a lot of teams are kind of seeing that and are just like, you know what, we would rather in this scenario, go grab a player via trade than having to send an offer sheet and have this money go on hold, all for the team to just match it with ease. The Chicago Bulls obviously have a lot of money to spend, well, relatively a lot of money to spend this summer. And listen, if we're being honest, they are known for handing out bad contracts, as of late. So wouldn't be surprised if they did a huge overpay for Tari, or it was at least enough for them to lure him from the Rockets. So we'll see what happens. I think Tari is a good fit for the Rockets. This past year was not indicative of the player he is. I think it was a drop off of a year, but I also think, that's not who Tari is. I don't think he's 49% from three good like he was prior to the All-Star break, and I don't think he was less than 10% from three. And, the player he was in March, I don't think that's him as a player either. With Dylan Brooks, they kind of lost like the grittiness and the leadership that he had with them, what he had with this team. I don't think Tari is gonna provide any leadership, but I think he does have the grit and the edge to a player that you need on your team, that you want on your team. He does, kind of he fights back at players. He goes at guys.